If I had known the kind of humiliation waiting for me that day, I might have stayed in uniform out of spite. But instead, I wore it because it was who I was, because after 2 decades of service, I didn't have to justify my choices to anyone. Or so I thought. The day began with turbulence, not in the air, but in my gut. Lydia, my younger sister by 6 years, was finally getting married. The invitations arrived 3 months earlier, glittered and gaudy, her signature aesthetic. I wasn't surprised that I was seated near the back. No +1. No special request to make a toast. Just a cold reminder that in her eyes, I had always been the black sheep with the masculine job who never wore makeup and skipped family brunches. Still, I RSVP'd yes. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I knew what it would mean if I wasn't. More ammunition. More whispers behind my back. She thinks she's too important for family. Or worse, she was probably deployed for some base gate duty. That was their favorite jab, assuming my decorated military career was reduced to checking IDs on a dusty post in the desert. My military career had cost me years of birthdays, countless holidays, and more relationships than I could count. But it gave me purpose, honor, rank. I commanded troops, oversaw missions, and saved lives. Yet, none of that mattered to my family. In their eyes, I was still just Eliza, the girl who didn't wear dresses, didn't chase boys, and didn't smile politely through every passive-aggressive insult at Sunday dinner. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel suite. My uniform was crisp, my posture precise. My medals, earned through deployments, commendations, and meritorious service, were aligned just as they should be. I wore my dress blues like a second skin, not for vanity, but for integrity. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "You're not seriously wearing that, are you?" I stared at the message and exhaled slowly. I didn't respond. What was the point? The ride to the venue, an extravagant vineyard estate just outside the city, was painfully quiet. The driver attempted small talk about the weather. I offered polite smiles, but my mind wandered to the last time I saw Lydia. It had been over a year, at our father's funeral. She wore black lace and crocodile tears. I wore my uniform then, too. She pulled me aside after the service and whispered, "You could have at least worn heels, Eliza." Heels. As I stepped out of the car, the air smelled of roses and white wine. Guests milled about in pastel dresses, pressed suits, and expensive colognes. I was the only one in uniform, again. Conversations paused as I passed. Not all of them out of respect. Some were just confused. "Is that Lydia's sister?" "Oh, she's military, right? Like, National Guard or something." I kept walking. At the front steps of the villa, Lydia stood radiant in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was curled in soft waves, pinned beneath a jeweled veil. She turned, saw me, and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You actually wore it," she said flatly. I nodded once. "Good morning." "I mean, it's a little intense for a vineyard wedding, don't you think?" She scanned me from head to toe. "All that metal and stuff, you couldn't find a dress?" "I don't wear dresses," I said calmly. Lydia looked past me, embarrassed. "God, Eliza. This is my big day." "And I'm here supporting you," I replied. "That should count for something." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Try not to steal attention, all right? This isn't a Veterans Day parade." The jab hit me in the ribs like a sucker punch. Still, I kept my spine straight and gave her a small nod. "I'm not here for attention. Just family." She flounced away without a reply. Inside, things only got worse. My seat, row 14, was sandwiched between a second cousin I barely knew and an elderly woman who spent the entire ceremony whispering about my outfit. I caught the word costume more than once. As the bride and groom exchanged vows, I focused on the stone pillars and the gentle rustling of vines in the breeze. I tuned out Lydia's overly rehearsed vows and Thomas's stiff, scripted promises. I hadn't even met the guy, they'd only been together for 8 months before getting engaged. Still, I was polite. I clapped. I smiled when appropriate. I waited for the reception like a soldier awaiting orders, braced, rigid, composed. But nothing prepared me for what would come next. After the ceremony, The guests migrated to the reception area, an open-air courtyard strung with fairy lights and swaying centerpieces. The air was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional toast. I kept mostly to myself. The waiter passed me champagne. I declined. Not drinking? A woman asked. She looked vaguely familiar, one of Lydia's sorority sisters, perhaps. I'm still active duty, I explained. She raised a brow. Really? Wow. I thought you were retired. Or like, desk duty now. I smiled politely. Still commanding. Her eyebrows shot up. You're in command? I nodded. Yes. Battalion level. She blinked, muttered a wow, and scurried off. Of course, none of it mattered. The real bomb was still ticking, Lydia's toast. When she took the mic that evening, wine glass in hand, I knew something was coming. Her smirk was too smug. Her posture too proud. And then, she opened her mouth. I just want to thank everyone who made it today, especially those who had to travel far, she began. And a big thank you to my big sister Eliza, who somehow found time to fly in from wherever the military sends gate guards. Laughter. Not everyone. But enough. I felt my jaw clench. My hands stayed folded neatly on my lap. I didn't move. Lydia continued, we were all so worried she wouldn't make it. I mean, guarding the entrance to a missile silo is important work. More laughter. The DJ chuckled. The best man covered his mouth. And look at her. Doesn't she look just so official tonight? Lydia gestured toward me with her glass. I mean, I haven't seen this many buttons since my grandma's sewing kit. I didn't flinch. I looked at my mother, she was smiling. My father would have stood up for me. He was a Marine. He understood the price of honor. But he was gone now. And the room? The room was with her. For a second, I thought about walking out. But I stayed. Because that's what leaders do. They endure. They wait. They let others show their character. And what Lydia didn't know, what no one there knew, was that I wasn't the only soldier in the room. And the groom? He was about to remind them all what real respect looks like. You never forget the sound of laughter aimed at your soul. Even after years in combat zones, where insults were barked in other languages and danger came dressed as silence, nothing had ever hit me quite like that toast. Not bullets. Not betrayal. Not even my own fear. Because this was family. This was my blood. And they laughed. When Lydia mockingly described me as a gate guard guarding a missile silo, the room erupted with giggles. Guests who had barely said a word to me all night suddenly found it hilarious. As if all my stripes, my scars, my 22 years of service were a Halloween costume. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. Because disappearing would mean they won. And I didn't survive mortar fire and insurgent raids to crumble at the hands of a champagne-drunk bride. I sat, stone-faced, as she continued to belittle me under the guise of humor. And Eliza, I mean this with love, she giggled. But I'm so glad you could take a break from saving the world, to watch me become someone's wife. There it was, the final dagger. That bitter, backhanded jab she always reserved for me, you've got medals, I've got a man. It wasn't even clever. It was just cruel. I glanced at the groom, Thomas, standing stiffly at the sweetheart table. His smile was strained, his hand white-knuckled around his champagne glass. He wasn't laughing. Good. Behind him sat the best man, a fellow officer from his unit, judging by his posture and the way he scanned the room like a man trained to assess. His gaze briefly met mine, and he gave me a subtle nod, not of apology, but of awareness. Lydia raised her glass. To my brave sister who has done, well, something important with radios and tents, I'm sure. But tonight, she's not a commander. She's my +1. The toast was met with laughter again. One woman clapped too enthusiastically. My mother laughed, not just laughed, but leaned into it, slapping the table with delight. I stayed seated. I didn't stand to correct her. I didn't raise my voice or fire back. Because power doesn't always yell. Sometimes it waits. Patiently. Sharpening itself in silence. And beside Lydia, Thomas put down his glass. Slowly. Intentionally. Then he rose. The room hushed the moment he stood. The mood shifted from raucous mockery to puzzled curiosity. Lydia blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Honey?" she asked, mic still in hand. Thomas reached for it. Gently, but firmly, he took it from her fingers. She frowned. "I was just joking." He turned away from her and faced the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice even, his tone commanding in a way that couldn't be taught, only earned. "If I may speak for a moment." The crowd quieted. "I know many of you came here to celebrate our love, and I thank you. It means the world to us. But I also believe in honoring truth, and tonight, some things were said that demand correction." Lydia's eyes widened. "Thomas." He ignored her. "I met Commander Eliza Warren, yes, Commander, 5 years ago during a multinational relief operation in Niger. I was a captain in the 9th Logistics Battalion. She was already a lieutenant colonel." A ripple moved through the crowd. My spine straightened, involuntarily. She oversaw a 20-person cross-national team under extreme pressure. We worked in 116-degree heat, under the constant threat of ambush, moving food and medical aid to over 10,000 civilians. One afternoon, our convoy came under fire. 3 of our vehicles were disabled. Communications went down. He glanced toward me. I froze. Most of us did. But she didn't. Lydia's jaw was beginning to drop. She got us out. Not by barking orders, but by example. She rerouted the wounded, coordinated airlift without tech support, and stayed behind in hostile territory to escort the final civilian caravan when no one else would. Gasps echoed from the crowd. The DJ turned the music down. She didn't get a headline, or a parade, or even a thank you from most of the people she saved. But I was there. I saw her, under fire, under pressure, under threat. And I knew right then. I was witnessing something rare. He looked directly at me. Greatness. My heart pounded. Not from embarrassment, but from something far more vulnerable. Validation. Thomas took a single step closer toward me. He set the mic on the sweetheart table, turned fully in my direction, and stood at attention. Then, in front of 200 guests, he raised his hand to his brow and saluted me with the precision of a man who knew protocol, but bowed with the reverence of a man who knew honor. "Ma'am," he said loud and clear. "Commander." You could hear the wind. The entire reception froze in place, as if time itself had paused. Lydia stood motionless, her mouth agape, her mic dangling uselessly at her side. Her bridesmaids exchanged horrified glances. My mother's jaw literally dropped open. And me? I blinked once. I didn't move. Because I knew this wasn't just about me. This was about every woman in uniform who'd been asked to smile more. About every soldier who'd been mocked at family gatherings. About every person whose strength had been minimized to keep someone else comfortable. Thomas dropped the salute, his shoulders relaxed, and he returned to his seat without fanfare. No applause followed. Just stunned silence. Then, from somewhere near the back, a slow clap began. Not sarcastic, but sincere. It built into polite, scattered applause. Not for the toast. Not for the bride. For me. I didn't rise. I didn't bow. I didn't even smile. Because in that moment, I didn't need to perform. I was finally seen. And that was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. After 22 years of active duty, I'd seen more standoffs than I could count. But nothing prepared me for the cold silence that followed Thomas's salute. No gunfire. No alarms. Just the sound of reality unraveling in the middle of a $70,000 wedding reception. Lydia remained frozen, her hand still gripping the microphone stand like it was an anchor in a sinking ship. The smirk that had danced on her lips all night was gone, replaced by something uncomfortably close to dread. It wasn't the kind of shock that comes from being corrected. It was the kind of realization that you've been living a lie too loud for too long, in front of too many people. Thomas's words echoed louder in the silence than the laughter that had filled the air minutes before. She outranks everyone in this room. That wasn't just a correction. It was an exposure. Guests who had chuckled at Lydia's speech were now shrinking into their seats. The same women who had commented on how intense my uniform looked were now whispering, heads down. Even my mother looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, the work was already done. A second clap. Then a third. Then quiet again. The applause had sputtered out, not from disapproval, but from confusion. No one knew how to recover. The groom had just elevated his bride's sister above the entire guest list, with a salute and the title commander. The silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. And then Lydia did what Lydia always did when she felt the spotlight slipping. She lashed out. Well, she said with a hollow laugh, that got heavy real fast, huh? No one laughed. She turned to Thomas. What was that supposed to be? A military fairy tale? You're embarrassing me. Thomas didn't flinch. I told the truth. Oh please, she snapped, her voice rising now. This isn't basic training, it's a wedding. Thomas stood up again, slower this time, and walked to the center of the dance floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grab a mic. But somehow, everyone heard him. With all due respect, Lydia, this was never just a wedding. This was a platform you used to belittle someone who's done more for this country than any of us will in a lifetime. Lydia's face twisted. I was joking. He turned to the crowd, addressing them more than her. She's led troops through war zones, negotiated ceasefires, carried wounded men on her back while under fire. And you thought the joke was funny? He looked right at my mother. You laughed. The air thickened. My mother stiffened, lips parting like she wanted to speak, but she didn't. Maybe for the first time in her life, she had no comeback. I stood in formations under her command. I watched grown men follow her into places most wouldn't dare walk. I've seen her take responsibility when others ran. And tonight she did the same. She sat there and endured your mockery in silence. He looked at me again. Because she's stronger than all of us. That's when Lydia cracked. Her composure snapped like thin glass. I can't believe this, she screamed, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. You're turning my wedding into her ceremony. Into some promotion parade. She stormed off the stage, veil bouncing, heels stabbing the floor. The bridesmaids hesitated, unsure whether to chase after her or disappear entirely. Thomas stayed where he was. I watched as he bent down, picked up the mic again, and placed it gently on the sweetheart table. Then he walked, not rushed, not flustered, directly toward me. I stood as he reached my table. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to meet him face to face. I meant every word, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I should have spoken up earlier. When I heard what she planned for her toast, I told her it wasn't a good idea. She laughed. Said it would lighten the mood. I didn't realize she meant humiliating you. She's always been like that, I said. And I've always let her. Not tonight. I nodded slowly. No, not tonight. We stood there for a moment, in full view of everyone. Then he extended his hand. Not for a shake, but a gesture of solidarity. I took it. And the room saw it, the sister who sat quietly through the mockery, and the groom who stood beside her in front of everyone. The message couldn't be clearer. Loyalty doesn't start at the altar. It starts with respect. Later, while people fumbled to restore normalcy with forced conversation and awkward laughter, I stepped outside. I needed air, not because I was emotional, but because I finally had the room to breathe. The courtyard garden was empty. A string of white lights hummed gently above me. In the distance, I could hear the faint bass of music the DJ had resumed, like a bandage over a bruise. And then, the door creaked open. My mother stepped out, arms folded tightly across her chest. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, facing me, searching my face like it was written in code. I didn't know, she finally said. Yes, you did, I replied. Her lips tightened. You knew what I did. You just didn't think it mattered. She looked down at the ground. It's not that we weren't proud. You were ashamed. A pause. Of a daughter who didn't fit the mold. Who didn't marry at 22. Who didn't chase approval or wear soft pastels. Her silence confirmed it. I exhaled. I'm not angry. I just won't apologize for who I am anymore. She looked up, eyes glassy. I didn't realize you commanded men. I don't command men, I said firmly. I lead soldiers. She nodded faintly. Your father would be proud. That struck something in me. I didn't cry, but my throat tightened. I know, I whispered. The door behind her opened again. This time, it was one of the older guests, a retired colonel who had been quietly observing everything. He approached slowly. "Commander Warren," he said, addressing me with the correct tone and posture. "I just wanted to shake your hand." I offered mine. "You handled that with more grace than most generals I've ever served under." "Thank you, sir." He nodded at my mother. "You raised one hell of a leader." Then he walked back inside. My mother looked at me with new eyes. Maybe for the first time. And though I didn't need her approval in that moment, I finally felt seen by her too. The moment Lydia stormed out, the room fractured like a dropped crystal glass. People didn't know whether to chase her, apologize to me, or pretend the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. The band started playing a soft jazz number, probably under strict instruction from the planner to keep the vibe light. But the music only highlighted how tense the air had become. Some guests fidgeted with their drinks. Others tried starting new conversations, desperate to pivot away from the embarrassment. One bridesmaid stared at her shoes like they might hold the answer to this wedding catastrophe. Another slipped out behind Lydia, her heels tapping out an uneven rhythm of uncertainty. I stood near the back of the room, by the open terrace doors. I wasn't hiding, I was observing. Like I had done in command briefings and civilian partnerships across borders. You learn a lot by watching how people behave when their version of the story is no longer the dominant one. The wedding coordinator approached Thomas nervously. Should we pause for now?" Thomas shook his head. "The reception continues. This is still a wedding, not a funeral." The planner gave him a half smile and disappeared back into the shadows. Then I saw her. Lydia. She stood in the hallway, slumped on a velvet bench like a deflated balloon in a designer gown. Her veil was askew, her makeup running in streaks down her cheeks. Gone was the confident bride. What sat there was a woman undone, unraveled by the weight of her own words. I approached quietly, stopping just short of the bench. She didn't look up. "Here to gloat?" she asked, voice flat. "No," I replied. "I came to check if you were okay." She scoffed, dabbing her eyes. "Don't pretend to care. You got what you wanted. Everyone saw it. You're the real star now." "I didn't want to be the star, Lydia. I wanted to be your sister." She sniffled. "You never wanted to be anything but superior. You always made me feel small." I folded my arms, not out of defensiveness, but to keep my hands from shaking. "No, Lydia. You felt small because you wanted a version of me you could control. One who clapped when told. One who wore dresses and smiled in silence." Her jaw clenched. "But that's not who I am. And that's never been my fault." Finally, she looked at me. "You embarrassed me." "No," I said gently. "You embarrassed yourself. You stood in front of our family and friends and mocked someone who's dedicated her life to service, not just mine, but everyone's." She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "And the worst part? You didn't even realize it was wrong until your husband reminded the room who I am." The word husband hit her like a slap. Her face crumpled again, not out of shame, but because she knew she had lost the illusion of being in control. She had treated Thomas as a prop in her fairy tale, a stage actor meant to nod and smile. Instead, he had sided with truth. With integrity. With me. "Do you know what it's like," she asked suddenly, "to feel like you're never enough? To always be the pretty one, the one who throws parties, the one who organizes baby showers, and still be invisible?" I was taken aback by the honesty in her voice. "Yes," I said softly. "I do. I felt invisible most of my life. But not because of how I looked or what I wore. Because no one in our family ever bothered to ask who I was becoming." She looked up sharply. "I wasn't trying to overshadow you, Lydia. I wore my uniform because I was coming straight from a command briefing. I attended your wedding, even when I knew I wouldn't be celebrated." She blinked rapidly. "I didn't need a toast or a thank you. I just needed not to be mocked." Her hands twisted the tissue in her lap. "I didn't think it would matter. I thought people would laugh and move on." They didn't. And we both knew they wouldn't. This wasn't a sitcom moment. This wasn't a TikTok trend. This was her wedding, and she had turned it into a humiliation campaign. One she had just lost. When we returned to the reception, the energy had shifted. The bar was busier than ever. People avoided eye contact. Conversations were hushed. I noticed several military guests had found each other. They stood in a quiet circle near the back, exchanging nods with me as I walked past. One of them, a Navy officer in a suit and tie, raised his drink and said, "Semper Fi, Commander." I returned the salute in kind. Word had spread. The woman mocked on stage wasn't just someone's sister. She was the Commander Eliza Warren, respected, decorated, and clearly revered by those who understood what those stripes meant. I re-entered the room and took my seat, this time near the head table. Thomas saw me and came over. "She okay?" he asked quietly. "She will be," I replied. "Eventually." He nodded. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." "I've endured worse." He chuckled. "Still, it shouldn't have happened." "No. But I appreciate what you did. That wasn't easy." He paused. "You've probably faced tougher enemies." I raised an eyebrow. "They usually don't wear wedding dresses." That got a real laugh out of him. He extended his hand again. "Thank you for staying." I took it. "Thank you for seeing me." The rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. Some guests apologized to me in passing. Others couldn't meet my eye. A few came over just to say they had no idea, and wished they'd known about my service. I nodded, politely thanked them, but didn't elaborate. This wasn't about education anymore. It was about restoration. The DJ announced the first dance, delayed by nearly an hour, and Thomas returned to the floor. Lydia walked out with slow steps, veil removed, eyes still swollen. She didn't smile. But she danced. And when she spun slowly into her groom's arms, she looked out at the room and paused on me. She didn't wave, didn't nod, but she didn't sneer either. It was the beginning of something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the death of denial. And I could live with that. Because in a single evening, I had gone from being mocked to being honored. From being dismissed as a gate guard to being saluted as a commander. And Lydia? She learned the hard way that legacy can't be laughed away. It either stands tall or crumbles under the weight of truth. I didn't expect the line, but there it was. Stretching from the sweetheart table all the way to the bar, a slow-moving line of guests waiting to speak to me. Not Lydia. Not Thomas. Me. The woman who had been mocked as a gate guard just hours earlier was now the most sought-after conversation in the room. It started with a quiet nod from an older man I didn't recognize. Then came the handshake from the Navy officer I'd noticed earlier. Before long, one guest after another began approaching, some offering apologies, others just quietly placing their hand over their heart in respect. "I didn't realize you were that Eliza Warren," one woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "My husband served under your command in Mosul. He said you were the only reason he came home." I blinked. "What's his name?" "Corporal Jared Mendez." I felt the name like a pulse in my chest. "I remember him," I said. "Sharp shooter. Quiet. Liked black coffee and never missed a sunrise." The woman's eyes welled with tears. "You saved his life. He doesn't talk about the war much. But he talks about you." I nodded solemnly. "Tell him I said thank you for his service. And for surviving." She hugged me. Others followed. A man in a dark gray suit who whispered, "My daughter's trying to quit ROTC. Would you mind recording a message for her?" A teenage boy, maybe 16, who shyly asked if I really fought terrorists and stuff. An elderly couple who simply wanted to thank me for being brave when others weren't. Each conversation unraveled years of invisibility. Each handshake patched something that had been torn inside me. Because for so long, I had believed my story was only meant for barracks and bunkers. That it had no place among cake slices and flower arrangements. But tonight, I realized the truth. Dignity has no setting. Respect doesn't require an invitation. People were beginning to see me not as a soldier or a sister, but as a woman who had earned her place, and never demanded it. I stepped outside for air again. Not to escape, but to feel the wind against my skin as something other than a defense mechanism. The vineyard was still. The moon cast long silver shadows across the gravel paths, and the sky was that rich, bottomless indigo that only comes after storms have passed. A moment later, Thomas joined me. "I think you're more popular than the bride," he said with a half-smile. "I'm not trying to be." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it worse for her." I gave him a look. "She'll recover. I'm sure. But tonight, you changed the narrative." "I didn't change anything," I replied. "I just stood still while people opened their eyes." He nodded, leaning against the railing beside me. "I was worried earlier, that I'd gone too far. That maybe I'd crossed a line standing up to her." "No," I said quietly. "You just chose the right one to stand beside." He looked down, thoughtful. "You know what's funny? I used to think leadership was about being the loudest, the most confident guy in the room. But after serving near you, watching how you moved, how you didn't speak unless it mattered, I realized leadership is restraint. It's conviction." I turned toward him. "It's consistency. People follow what's steady." He smiled. "You're steady, Eliza. Not just as a commander. As a woman." That caught me off guard more than any salute had. I looked away. I wasn't always. I doubted myself plenty of times. "But you didn't break." "No," I said. "Because breaking would have been easier than rebuilding." He nodded slowly. "That's what Lydia doesn't understand. You don't need the spotlight. You are the light." That silenced us both. For a long moment, we just stood in the stillness of the night, breathing the same cool air that no longer carried tension. Then the door creaked open. Lydia. Her eyes met mine from across the gravel. She looked tired, softer, not broken, but disarmed. "Can we talk?" she asked. Thomas gave me a glance that said you don't have to, but I nodded. "I'll give you two space," he said, stepping back inside. Lydia approached slowly. "I didn't mean for it to get that bad," she said, voice low. "You meant what you said," I replied. "You just didn't expect the backlash." She bit her lip. "I guess I forgot you weren't just my sister. You're someone out there. Someone bigger." "No," I said. "I've always been your sister. You just chose not to see the rest." She winced. "I was jealous." I raised a brow. "All my life, people praised you for your discipline, your strength. Even when you were gone, people talked about you. But me? I had to throw parties and plan events and look perfect just to feel noticed." I didn't interrupt. I wanted this wedding to be mine. To prove something. I thought if I poked at you, made you look small, I'd finally feel bigger. Did it work? She shook her head. It made me feel smaller. We stood there in the quiet again. "I can't undo what I said," she whispered. "No," I replied. "But you can stop pretending I'm your enemy." She nodded. "I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." "I understand." A beat. "I hope, maybe someday, we can be sisters again." "We still are," I said. "But it's going to take more than words." She wiped her cheek. "Then I'll start with this." And to my absolute astonishment, she saluted. It wasn't perfect. Her fingers were too wide. Her arm was too low. But it was real. From Lydia, that was everything. I didn't return the salute. I just pulled her into a quiet, one-armed hug, a soldier's embrace. Firm, no tears. Just mutual recognition. When I walked back into the reception hall, something shifted in me. I wasn't just standing in a fancy venue with sparkling chandeliers and overpriced wine. I was standing in my truth. Fully. Unapologetically. People clapped again, but this time it wasn't for a moment, it was for a presence. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. I didn't need dessert. I'd stayed long enough. The ceremony, the collapse, the awkward middle, and the quiet reconciliation, all of it had unfolded with cinematic clarity. If this had been a movie, I suppose I would have stayed through the last scene, walking off into a vineyard sunset as the credits rolled. But in real life, sometimes dignity isn't in how you stay. It's in how you leave. I rose from my seat while the music played and guests danced under fairy lights. My chair made a quiet scraping sound against the polished floor, but no one turned. They were too immersed in pretending everything had gone back to normal. But nothing had gone back to normal. Because I wasn't who they thought I was. And now, they knew it. I made my way toward the exit, passing by lingering clusters of guests. Some nodded, others offered soft smiles. A few avoided eye contact altogether. That was fine. Everyone processes truth at their own pace. "Commander," someone called behind me. I turned to find the wedding photographer, a young woman with thick-rimmed glasses and a camera strap worn from use. "May I?" she asked, holding up her lens. I blinked. "A photo?" She nodded. "I've never photographed a woman who's been saluted at her sister's wedding. I think that deserves a frame." I smiled, surprised by how warm I felt. "One photo." She positioned me just beside the marble entrance. I stood naturally, hands behind my back, shoulders relaxed. "Perfect," she whispered. Click. Then she lowered the camera and added, "That's the strongest woman I've ever seen in a viewfinder." I nodded, grateful, and continued walking. Outside, the air was cool and still. The stars had come out in full brilliant, uncaring diamonds strewn across the ink-black sky. I walked down the gravel path to the circular driveway where valet attendants stood chatting quietly by a row of parked cars. My heels, regulation, 2 inches, worn only for formal military occasions, tapped softly against the stones. I didn't carry a purse. I didn't need anything from the evening. Nothing to prove. Nothing to retrieve. Just my exit. But as I reached the edge of the driveway, I heard a soft gasp behind me. "Eliza." I turned. My mother stood there, slightly hunched in her pale champagne dress, her clutch held tightly to her chest like a fragile shield. "I didn't think you'd leave without saying goodbye." I offered a soft nod. It seemed easier this way. She stepped closer, her shoes crunching against the gravel. "May I say something?" I hesitated, then nodded. I was wrong. She said it simply, not dramatically, not with tears or overcompensation. Just plainly, as if it had waited years to be spoken. "I didn't understand what you'd become. I thought you were trying to prove something by choosing that life. But I realize now, you weren't proving anything. You were living it." I stayed silent, letting her speak. "I never saw the sacrifices. I saw the distance. I saw you miss holidays and birthdays, and I thought you didn't care. But you were, giving your life to something bigger than all of us. And I never told you how proud I was." I looked at her then, really looked at her. My mother, the woman who had once begged me to join a book club instead of the army. Who used to hide my deployment photos from her friends because no one needs to know all that. Who laughed when Lydia joked about the costume. And now, she was here, at midnight, apologizing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she added. "I just want you to know, I saw you tonight. For the first time. And I will never unsee it." That last line did something to me. It cracked open a little part of me I hadn't realized was still armored. I stepped forward and gently pulled her into a hug. She trembled slightly in my arms, but I held her steady, just as I'd done for wounded soldiers, frightened cadets, and civilians halfway across the world. She exhaled against my shoulder. "I love you." "I know," I whispered. "I love you too." We stood like that for a long while, under the stars in the stillness. When I finally pulled back, her eyes were glassy, but peaceful. "Will you come home soon?" she asked. "Just for dinner. No speeches. No uniforms. Just, Eliza." "I'll try," I said with a small smile. "But no promises on the uniform." She laughed softly. "Fair." The valet handed me my keys, and I slid into the driver's seat of my black SUV. As the engine purred to life, I took one last glance in the rearview mirror. The vineyard behind me glowed faintly. A place that would, no doubt, remain etched in my family's story for decades, but not because of the cake or the dress or the bouquet toss. Because of the moment when power, long buried under mockery and silence, finally stood up, and was saluted. I drove in silence for most of the night. My hotel was across town, near the base. I liked staying close, not just for convenience, but for identity. It reminded me who I was beneath the decorations. As I pulled into the hotel lot, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not letting her define you. You changed more than one life tonight. T. I replied simply. Respect is earned. You showed it. Thank you. Another message arrived just seconds later, from a number I didn't recognize. This is Lydia. I meant what I said. I'm going to work on it. For real this time. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed. Take your time. Just lead with truth. That's all I ask. No emojis. No flourish. Just honesty. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked out the window. The sky was starting to turn, the first hints of dawn painting soft streaks of blue across the black. It felt symbolic, almost too neatly timed. But life has a way of doing that when you finally step into alignment. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a run. Not because I needed the cardio, but because I needed motion. I needed to feel my muscles tighten and loosen in rhythm with my breath, to feel grounded again. As I passed early joggers and sleepy dog walkers, I noticed how many people nodded at me. Smiled. Not because of who I was, but because I was simply present. No rank. No salute. Just a woman reclaiming her space. And when I slowed to a walk, just outside the old park where I used to train cadets, I heard a small voice from behind. Ma'am? I turned. A girl, maybe 17, wearing running shoes too big for her and a t-shirt that said Class of 2025. I saw you at the wedding last night, she said shyly. My dad was there. He told me you were the real deal. I raised an eyebrow. The real deal. He said you don't just wear the uniform. You carry it. I smiled. What's your name? Danielle. You thinking of joining? She hesitated. I was scared. But now maybe. I extended a hand. If you do it for the right reasons. Not to prove anything. Not to chase anyone's approval. Just to serve, with purpose. She nodded and shook my hand. And in that moment, I realized something. The impact of what happened at the wedding wouldn't end with a headline or a family scandal. It would ripple. In girls like Danielle. In guests who would never forget that one quiet woman in a uniform. In a sister learning humility. In a mother rediscovering her daughter. And in me, in the parts one had buried for far too long under duty, silence and survival. So yes, Lydia mocked me. But her groom saluted me. And in the echo of that salute, something beautiful bloomed. Not revenge. But restoration. Because respect, when finally received, doesn't need applause. It just needs truth.